Hello again, everyone. I forgot on that last video I was supposed to talk about um, why God allows bad things to happen. I think during this time with this coronavirus crisis, we may be very tempted to ask ourselves, why would God let this happen? Whether that is to you personally or to the world. And so it really kind of causes us to think about the nature of God and the problem of evil and the problem of terrible things happening. So I wanted to talk about that really quickly. First of all, you need to know that this is just not a new thought. Anytime that we have tragedy that affects us, most of the time our first thoughts drift toward God because innately we know that God is in the God of the Bible, at least, is considered omniscient and all powerful, and so we wonder, why would God let such horrible things happen to good people, or even to believers, His children? And that's a very valid thought. And I think that the Bible can deal with that thought, and God can deal with that thought, being honest with God. That's a thought that many people have, and it's a very fair thought. But recall that when we're talking about why bad things happen, we have to sync our understanding with the way that the Bible describes the development of creation and the nature of humanity and so on and so forth. It's kind of like connecting the dots, if you will. So it's very important for us to understand really two things. Um, the nature of creation, and also the second thing would be how to view our situation. A lot of times we view our situation through our experience. We view God through our experience. We use our experience as the grid by which we understand everything, and that's not always the best idea. So, the nature of creation, it's very important for us to know that in the very beginning, when God created humanity, He created Adam and Eve, and there's a demonstration of a parting ways with God, if you will, with Adam and Eve. They decided not to obey God and to turn away from God. And after God had talked to them about the importance of following His counsel and obeying Him, and telling them that if they uh, did not choose to follow Him, that they would not be choosing life, they would be choosing death. And of course, death meant eternal death and physical death, but it also meant a um, catastrophic cosmic death to all creation. So not only did we as humans fall in during that time, but creation did as well. And that's why we have hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that, because we do live not only in a fallen humanity, but in a very literal fallen world. And so bad things happen as a result of what man has chosen. And even in regards to any given viruses come about for various reasons. None of which is not somehow, in some way, probably connected to the wrong way men do many things. And so we can't put our choices to be away from God and to turn away from God and the nature of what happened as a result of that onto God Himself. The Bible itself describes God as a loving God, faithful God. He certainly is everything that He talks about in the Bible. But when we're trying to understand why bad things happen to us, we cannot surmise that God doesn't love us because we're going through some kind of a terrible trial or even a tragic event. We see that Christ went through His own tragic event when He was crucified and tortured, and He remained faithful to God the Father during that time. We see such fidelity in the way Christ transcended his suffering during that time, that he remained faithful to God. He demonstrated his love for God the Father and his faithfulness to God. We see other characters in the Bible do the same thing. We think very quickly about Joseph in Genesis, how when he went through his many lengthy, long trial of being betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery and falsely accused and imprisoned falsely under false accusations, and during all that time he remained faithful to God. And so we see different characters in the Bible demonstrate their fidelity to God because they knew God, and they didn't judge God by their experiences. And we just have to realize that we do live in a fallen world, and things take its course, and sometimes God does decide to intervene in different ways, and we can't account as to why he does what he does. We just need to recognize that we are not God. God is God and we are not, and we may not know the answers to any of those questions, even as long as we live, no matter what kind of tragic events that we go through. We see that with the situation with Job, what a tremendous demonstration of what destruction, just a terrible destruction to a life that can happen, and that happened with Job. And in the end, when you see Job reconcile with God and realize who he was before, when he stood before God with a more presence of mind. So we have to realize that we're not the first people to go through very tragic or difficult circumstances, and we should not treat God in a way that is not communicated to us in the scriptures, because the God of the Bible is the Christian God. And if we develop a God other than, in our minds at least, other than the way the Bible describes that God, then we're dealing with a different God altogether, a different false God altogether. So if we're trying to come into terms with what's going on in our life, we need to be honest with God about our emotions and talk to him, come to him in a way of honesty, but respect, and really work through that with him, because he does love us. He knows what we're going through, and he will not forsake us or leave us. And of course, so that the first order of business is to, like I said, is to understand the fallen creation. The second part is understanding our situation through the scriptures rather than through our experiences. When we're going through very difficult circumstances, that can really inflame our emotional state, and it's very hard for us to make proper evaluations of our situations, of other people, and certainly of God himself. And so we have to be very careful to do that. We know that we are prone to tell ourselves things that are not true, and our emotional compromise is not a good basis in how to move forward into healing. We really just need to trust what the Bible says about God rather than what we're seeing, or maybe even what we're feeling. And in that, we can remain faithful to the witness of God. So God, it also, we need to remember that God can use our suffering in ways that we'll never conceive of. There's a lot of times we will go through very terrible times, but in due time we'll realize that God has used it to switch us into different lanes. He may use it to comfort some other people. He may use it for demonstrating his power in some way. We just can't possibly conceive of what God can do with our suffering. But we need to realize that God is love. He is powerful, and he can do things beyond our lifetime that we're even aware of through this lifetime. I would just encourage you to pray, to remain faithful to God, and to trust Him. And if you want a link on trusting, I put a video out earlier. You can do that. So I hope this is a little bit helpful. It's very important for us to think clearly.